Are you an engaged reader? Do you engage readers with your writing? Game up your reading and writing skills by understanding imagery, personification, and alliteration. Word choice impacts understanding and enjoyment of a text. Let's see how word choice plays a key role in these literary techniques of alliteration, personification, and imagery in a tried and true classic. Let's look at the word choice in Jack London's The Call of the Wild. Here's a paragraph from Chapter 3, The Dominant Primordial Beast. Let's read. The breaking down of discipline likewise affected the dogs in their relations with one another. They quarreled and bickered more than ever among themselves, till at times the camp was a howling bedlam. Dave and Sol-leks alone were unaltered, though they were made irritable by the unending squabbling. Francois swore strange barbarous oaths, and stamped the snow in futile rage, and tore his hair. His lash was always singing among the dogs, but it was to small avail. Directly his back was turned, they were at it again. He backed up Spitz with his whip, while Buck backed up the remainder of the team. Francois knew that he was behind all the trouble, and Buck knew he knew, but Buck was too clever ever again to be caught red-handed. He worked faithfully in the harness, for the toil had become a delight to him. Yet it was a greater delight slyly to precipitate a fight among his mates and tangle the traces. Now, through Jack London's use of imagery, personification, and alliteration, we accomplish these important steps for comprehension and enjoyment of the text. We see the scene, we hear the commotion, we identify personalities and roles and relationships. Let's first look at the alliteration which opens this paragraph. The breaking down of discipline likewise affected the dogs in their relations with one another. The D sound, the repetition of that D sound, down of discipline. This is alliteration, and authors often use alliteration to set the scene, to give a certain mood to the writing. They also use alliteration to give emphasis to a specific part. I think here Mr. London is doing both of these things. He is setting the mood and he is giving emphasis to kind of a central theme that is going on not only in this paragraph but also in the chapter and in the larger context of the entire novel. It's the breaking down of discipline that plays a critical role in the evolution of the different personalities, the different roles, and the changes in the relationships. Now, let's look at how he tells us they fought. He doesn't just say that the dogs fought. He says it in a way that he shows us. He uses strong verbs and imagery to show the scene. We can see and hear the ruckus going on. Let's read it again. They quarreled and bickered more than ever among themselves. So he tells us here with two different verbs that they fought, yet he never says they fought. He says they quarreled and bickered. These are two better choices of words that aren't as used as fought. In our everyday language, we kind of overuse the word fought. We use it a lot more commonly than we use quarreled or bickered. Thus, quarreled and bickered are better choices to help our readers to see the scene when we're writing something. Also, I want you to look at the rest of that first sentence. He gives us some greater detail to help us to hear and visualize what is going on. They quarreled and bickered more than ever among themselves, till at times the camp was a howling bedlam. All right. Howling. You can hear the howling. Bedlam. Complete and utter chaos. So it is very chaotic. The dogs are howling. You can hear them snarling and growling at one another. It is just a terrible mess. And he doesn't just tell us that the dogs fought. He shows us. He allows us to hear it. He allows us to be in there, in that scene. Let's keep reading. Dave and Sol-Lex alone were unaltered, though they were made irritable by the unending squabbling. Unending. We see it goes on and on by his use of this adjective. Now, squabbling. There's another word that means fighting. We have quarreled, bickered, and squabbling, instead of ever once using the word fight or fought. Now, we also see personalities, relationships, and roles here. Let's look at Francois. Francois swore strange barbarous oaths and stamped the snow in futile rage and tore his hair. What do we see about Francois here? We see three things that he did, three very vivid verbs. He swore, he stamped, he tore. He's having a fit. Yet Jack London does not write Francois had a fit. Instead of saying Francois had a fit, Jack London shows us that fit. He allows us to hear that fit, because we hear Francois swearing those strange barbarous oaths. We hear him as he's grumbling and stomping in the snow. We see that. We see the snow flying up around him. We see him tear and pull at his hair. We hear him probably growling and grumbling as he's doing this. Now, look at the next sentence. His lash was always singing among the dogs. That tells us this is always a constant ruckus going on. So, again, we visualize, we see that. Look at the next part of that sentence. But it was to small avail. Let's look at that, or think about that, and look at the very next sentence. Directly his back was turned, they were at it again. Let's think about what these things tell us about Francois. What did these verbs, swore, stamped, tore, what does that sentence tell us about his personality? Maybe Francois is impatient and quick-tempered. Maybe he lacks self-control and is a more reactive person than a proactive person. It seems that he's very reactive because he doesn't strategize effectively how to control these dogs. Now, let's look at his role. Since his lash is always singing among the dogs, what does that tell us about his role with the dogs? He is supposed to be in a position of leadership over the dogs, to control the dogs. Now, let's look at his relationship with them. Now, we see that his lash is always singing, but does it work? Does it accomplish his purpose? No, it is to small avail. It does not work. It does not succeed. The very last sentence, directly his back was turned, they were at it again. So as soon as Francois is not fussing at and lashing out at these dogs, they're fighting again. What does that tell you about their respect for Francois? Right, they don't have any respect for him. They do not respect him. With a domesticated dog, you can even see this. It's the same with a sled dog. They have a relationship with the humans that have control over them or take care of them. They need to respect those humans, and they're not going to respect those humans if they don't trust those humans. So, do you think that these dogs trust Francois? No, they don't. They don't trust him. They don't respect him. And also, on the flip side, they do not fear him. They are not afraid of what he will do to them. So, you know, we have that saying that a dog's bark is bigger than his bite. Well, maybe in doggy language here, the dogs feel this way about Francois, that his bark is bigger than his bite, because they're not afraid of what he might do to them physically as repercussion for their fighting. They fight anyway. And they certainly do not have respect or trust for him. Now, let's look at Buck. We can see Buck's personality and his relationship with Francois in this selection. He, meaning Francois, backed up Spitz with his whip, while Buck backed up the remainder of the team. Francois knew he was behind all the trouble, and Buck knew he knew. But Buck was too clever ever again to be caught red-handed. He worked faithfully in the harness, for the toil had become a delight to him. Yet it was a greater delight slyly to precipitate a fight amongst his mates and tangle the traces. All right, guys. Wow, what do we see about Buck right here? Let's inference. Who is Buck? What is his personality? What's his role on the team? What's his relationship like with Francois? First off, let's look at his personality. All right, we already see outright that it says he's too clever ever again to be caught red-handed. So we see that perhaps Buck has been caught doing something he should not do and has been reprimanded in some way for that. But he's too clever ever again to do it and get caught. He'll do it, but he won't get caught. So we see that Buck is very clever. Also, the next sentence, he worked faithfully in the harness. So we see that Buck is a good loyal dog to do the work that he's supposed to do. He's not lazy. Now, we see greater on in that sentence, for the toil had become a delight to him. If the toil became a delight, that means it was not always a delight. So that shows us that Buck has a level of adaptability, that he adapted to his situation and is making the best of it. Now also, look on toward the end. It was a greater delight slyly to precipitate a fight. He's sly. He's precipitating fights. So he's a tricky one, isn't he? He's very sneaky, and he's an instigator of trouble, as we see right here. Now, if you want to find out if this is how Buck has always behaved with this team, and if this has always been his personality, you'll just have to read the whole novel. What is his relationship with Francois like? Let's back up. Let's look at his role with the team. Look at that very first sentence. He backed up Spitz, meaning Francois. Francois backed up Spitz with his whip, while Buck backed up the remainder of the team. What does that tell you about Buck? You're right. He is in a leadership position of some sort with this team because he is taking control over the rest of the dogs while Francois is dealing with one dog. So that tells us Buck does have some authoritative control over the rest of the team. Now, what about his relationship with Francois? Well, look at that sentence that is underlined. Francois knew he was behind all the trouble, and Buck knew he knew. That means that they kind of have this unspoken understanding, which, well, Buck wouldn't speak to Francois anyway, but they have this understanding between them. Perhaps it's not a satisfactory relationship of understanding, but they both get it. They both understand something. They know something that isn't necessarily information for the rest of the pack. It's something that maybe the rest of the team does not understand. I want you to notice how London ends this paragraph. He ends it with alliteration just as he began it. So clever. He worked faithfully in the harness, for the toil had become a delight to him. Yet it was a greater delight slyly to precipitate a fight amongst his mates and tangle the traces. Excuse me. So we see three short uses of alliteration here. Notice that they are underlined on the screen. Delight, slyly. We hear the repetition of the I sound. Now, we see something about Buck's character here. We see something about his personality because it was a delight for him to slyly precipitate these fights, right? You can even add that whole phrase in, delight, slyly to precipitate a fight, because you still have that I sound with fight. Now, notice the next one, amongst his mates. You have the repetition of the M sound. And then tangle the traces. You have the repetition of the T sound. Remember, repetition of sound is what alliteration means. And authors use that for a few different purposes. Often it is to set the mood for the scene or to give emphasis to something. Often an author will use this to emphasize something that connects to the larger context, connects to the larger theme of the writing. So here we see that he's giving us clues into personalities, into relationships, and motives, and just the bigger picture of the mess going on. Now, not only does Jack London use alliteration, imagery, and personification, but he also uses other strategies as well throughout the entire novel, The Call of the Wild. He uses all these different strategies to show us, not just tell us about, but show us the evolution of the characters, their individual personalities, their roles, and their relationships with one another. What's the result of all this very important, strenuous work in which he was very purposeful in which words he chose? What's the result of this purposeful writing? The result is that we have a timeless classic that we get to enjoy, in which, through the perspective of this outsider dog named Buck, we get a glimpse into the primordial spirit that drives us all, man and beast. So we get to see through the eyes of this dog something that is a universal theme that applies to us humans as well. It's that primordial spirit, that drive. Now, I want you to game up your writing, guys. Practice adding in the sensory details that engage the senses, your sight, your sound, your touch, your smell, your taste, all these things. That's your imagery. I want you to practice adding in the alliteration, the repetition of the sounds. I want you to practice adding in personification, where you give a human-like quality to something not human. And the more you practice, the more you will succeed. So let's practice some word choices, okay? Look at this sentence. The wind blew. We have what and what it did. What? The wind. What did it do? The wind blew. But that's just a boring basic sentence. Yes, it tells us what happens, but we want more than to just be told what happens. The wind blew hard. That tells us how the wind blew. And here, the wind blew through the trees. That tells us where the wind blew. Let's try a little better than this. The whistling wind whipped through the trees. Yes, there is a little poetic meter going on there because of that alliteration. The whistling wind whipped. All right, we have that repetition of sound, the alliteration with the W sound. And then you also have personification because you have whistling. The wind is whistling like a human. I can't whistle very well, but maybe you can. But the wind is whistling. It's whistling. And then we also have this visualization. We see it because we can hear it. You hear the whistling wind. You hear it whipping through the trees. Maybe it's breaking branches and twigs, and maybe it's making the leaves fall, and the leaves are rustling together. So we hear the effects of this wind whistling through the trees. Now, when we're hearing this, because of these word choices, it also creates in our mind a visual image. So then we also see it. We see this wind whipping through these trees. So once you can see it and you can hear it, you can almost feel it. Engage the senses, guys. And remember, in this sentence, we incorporated alliteration, personification, and imagery. Yes, it is that important because we saw in that short one-paragraph selection from Jack London's The Call of the Wild, he employed these in every part of the writing. No word was for waste. Every word was on point with a purpose. Now let's practice with this one last sentence. We have the basic what and what it did. The truck stopped. Then we give a little more detail. The loud truck stopped. But then we give a better detail about not just loud, but what's making it so loud. It's sputtering. That's what we hear. It's sputtering. The sputtering truck died. Well, what kind of truck? Tow truck. The sputtering tow truck died. So now we visualize, we hear what is going on. We hear that sputtering truck. It's sputtering. The sputtering tow truck. So we hear it and then we see it going down the road, right? It's sputtering, slowly going down the road, and then it dies. So what do you see? You see it stop, And then what do you hear? You hear silence. You do not hear sputtering any longer. So we visualize and hear what is going on because of the word choice that is used. So we use the personification and the imagery to help the reader see the scene, for the reader to be there and kind of experience it and interact with that text. So guys, the point of today's lesson is that imagery, alliteration, and personification, it's for readers and for writers. When you're reading, I want you to look for these things. I want you to look for all these different things that we've gone over today, that repetition of sound, the giving human-like qualities to things that are not human, and engaging the senses, words that help you to see and hear, maybe smell, taste, feel the different things within the text. I want you to look for this. This will help you make inferences. It will help you to make good judgment calls about characters, about what's going on, what characters might do in the future. It helps you to interact with the text, which helps you to better understand it and enjoy it. And guys, if you're a writer, even if you just write something short for someone as something for fun, add these things. Add your imagery, add your alliteration, add your personification, because this will engage your readers. Guys, there's more reading and writing helps to come. So if you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up. I would appreciate if you like it and subscribe to my channel, Learning Tidbits with Jeannie Malone. Yes, it's a new channel. There's not a lot there, but there will be. I'll be adding to it weekly. And also, I have some more helps for grammar, for writing, for reading on my new website, learningtidbits.net. You can also email me at learningtidbitsjm@gmail.com. Maybe if you have some writing that you would like for me to look over for you, it won't cost you anything. It's just something, one writer to another. I guess one nerd to another, I can look over something for you, because two sets of eyes and two perspectives are always better than one. So guys, I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Until then, take care and happy writing and happy reading.